and get started. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Angie Bailey on behalf of the Miramar Pembroke Pines Regional Chamber of Commerce and its South Broward Foundation. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. We are so thrilled to have so many dedicated nonprofit leaders with us today. Your commitment to making a difference in our community is really inspiring, and it's an honor to support your efforts with this important topic of grant research and grant writing. Grants can really be a game changer for your organization. So today's session is designed to equip you with the skills and the strategies to find and secure the funding that you need to continue all the vital work that you're doing in our communities. So we're very fortunate to have a fantastic instructor with us today who will be sharing her expertise and insights. But before I introduce her and sing her highest praises, I want to thank you all for being here and for all the incredible work you do. So let's dive in. Let's make the most of this opportunity to learn and grow together this morning with our speaker, Kirsten Stevens with the Kannico Agency for Global Good. Kirsten is certified in nonprofit management, and she is a certified fundraising executive and is also a certified board-sourced nonprofit consultant. She's currently pursuing her PhD in sustainable development and diplomacy. In her work with startup organizations, Kirsten assists with nonprofit incorporation and registration, IRS filing and reporting, and ongoing compliance practices. Her focus is on working with entities that seek to help develop high-performance culture and obtain measurable outcomes with significant social impact. For more established entities, her firm provides strategic consulting, board development, and executive search. Through her consulting company, the Kannico Agency, she and her team work with foundations, for-profits, and nonprofits, advising on alternative revenue streams, identifying opportunities for maximizing social impact, and ensuring that nonprofits achieve organizational excellence. Kirsten considers herself a passionate global ambassador and enjoys travel and connecting with people and organizations all over the world. Please give her a warm welcome, Ms. Kirsten Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to be here. This is exciting because this is the follow-up to our first session, which was the all-day session. And thank you all. And what we did on that first day session was an overview. And so now what we're doing is we're really doing a deep dive into some of these critical areas that are going to help you actually make some transformational change and take big steps towards moving things forward. And you know, when you pull back and you look at the landscape, you think, oh my goodness, there's just so much that I could be doing. How on earth am I going to pull all of this together? And what I'd like to reassure you is that if you can just chip away at it, if you can commit to these small pieces that you do and you stick with it and you have some discipline, you will get there. There's no doubt about it. Because is the money out there? Yes. The money is out there. Is the need out there? Yes, absolutely. So we have a match. The question is, are we being as effective as we possibly can be to connect those two? That's the important thing. So if you're doing a fantastic job in your organization, which you should be, then you deserve to be funded to the fullest capacity so that you can continue to execute on your mission. So today we're going to focus on the grants portion of your funding stream. And I do want to preface this by saying that, first of all, much of the information that I provide is based on anecdotal information. It's from my work with nonprofits. I did grant writing almost exclusively for about 7 years. And many of you know that I was born and raised in Latin America. I lived in the Bahamas for 18 years. I actually started my grant writing career in the Bahamas, writing for Templeton Foundation, and I secured a $250,000 grant. That was my first grant. And from there, I just became intrigued by this process. And I thought, well, what is this? What's the synergy? What is the mystery between funders and nonprofits? And how do we crack the code? How do we really dig deep and build these relationships with foundations so that we have sustainable income? But the other piece of this is that grants are a portion of your revenue. They are not what you should be wholly dependent on. And I know that it's always very attractive and very appealing. And it feels like, oh, we'll get some grants. That'll sort of solve the problem. But grants come and go. Funders may stop funding you. So the best approach that you can take is an even distribution of your efforts. And what that means is, if you are a young organization and you're just getting started, or you just haven't devoted a lot of attention to extending the reach of your funding efforts, you want to look at a couple of different things at the same time. So I say this because I don't want us to double down on the grants and forget about the importance of planting those seeds with the individual donors. So that needs to be happening simultaneously. You need to be building your newsletter list, building an email list, find a way that you can communicate with people. One of the best ways is to ask your board members for 5 to 10 names of people that you can send your email newsletter list or email blast to every year or every few months, or, for your end of year fundraising efforts. So keep that going, even if it doesn't generate revenue for the first 1 to 2 years. But get people used to seeing you and hearing about you and learning about the organization, get their interest going, while you also then focus on your grant efforts, perhaps corporate sponsorships. Maybe there's some earned income, there's some service revenue you can pursue for your organization. So we're looking at a balance. And in an ideal scenario, really, your grants revenue should be about 30% of your income. It shouldn't be more than that. You should be looking at let's say you're at a point where you feel like you've established some sustainable funding. Typically, it's 60 to 70% of individual contributions, and the remainder would be in your grant funding. The other thing to remember is that, as I mentioned earlier, funders will fund you for a while and then possibly decide to shift their funding focus. You need to be prepared for that. You need a backup plan. So with all of that in mind, we're going to jump in. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my screen. We're going to start with a little bit of an introduction in terms of what to expect today. And let me share my screen. So get my cursor down here. Alrighty, so you all know who I am. I actually, back when I was very heavily in the grant writing world, we wrote an ebook with a colleague of mine, an expert grant writer in North Carolina, called "Get the Grant, Change the World." It's on Amazon, in case you have any interest in pursuing that. But really what I want to talk about is, how do we go from today I need some grants to, okay, I found some, I'm thinking about the LOI, I'm thinking about the proposal, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. So how do we get through this process that can be so daunting? By the way, Angie, I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen. So if you actually I can, but I don't know what'll happen if I click on it. So
no worries. I'll be attentive. Yep.
Perfect. And I think what we can do is we can stop every so often and just address questions, because I don't want to get too far along and then your question that was very relevant 10 minutes ago, we didn't address. And I think we'll take a very quick 5-minute break at about the hour mark, just in case anyone needs to step away or check messages and so on. Okay. So we're going to go through a little bit of an introduction. We want to talk about getting you prepared. What does that mean? What do you need to have in place before you even get started? Or at least know that you should have in place so you can start getting organized. We are going to do some prospecting. We're going to look for funders. We're going to do a live demo in Foundation Directory. I don't know if any of you have gone into Foundation Directory. The professional version is expensive. It's $219 a month. You can access it in several places, and we'll talk about that. But I figured, why not? Let's go ahead and do a live demo so you can actually see what I would do if I were going in and looking for grants. We're using FDO today just because that is the one I've used for the longest. I know Instrumental is fantastic, and there's some other ones, but that's the one we'll use. We'll talk a little bit about the LOI, the letter of intent, inquiry, or interest, depending on what the term is that the funder uses. We'll talk about the proposal. We'll talk about the budget, and then we'll talk about your sort of tips that I have and the experience that I've had and conversations that I've had with funders that have really, really shed some light on this whole process. So really, it's about demystifying this. It's about making sure you feel confident, you feel good, you find the best grants, you feel empowered, you've got some background knowledge on what makes funders tick, and you feel really good about tackling this. You don't feel intimidated. We have a lot of tools and resources out there that can help you. So, and they're free, right? So you could be using AI. You can go online and look for grants. So let's jump into how you currently find funders. When I ask this question, most people will say, I search online, now I use AI, I look for RFPs, and you can set up your Google alerts to let you know when there are RFPs for grant proposals. So that's an option. Word of mouth, you look at other nonprofits and see who's funding them. But I will say on some of these things, and maybe there's some other ways that you look, but searching online, let's just tackle that. Less than 10% of the foundations that you apply to or that you see that are options for you if you go in and do research, less than 10% have websites. So they don't all have websites. I think that number is increasing, but they don't all have websites. So you're not necessarily going to find them just by Googling and by searching. RFPs, less than half of funders publish RFPs, and they are not legally required. They're not ethically required. The IRS doesn't require them to provide RFPs. So those can be hard to find as well. GuideStar is good, but GuideStar is, Candid is the merger of GuideStar and FDO. We've talked about GuideStar before. You should have a very robust profile on GuideStar. Looking for foundations on GuideStar is not ideal. You're not going to see the giving limitations, application guidelines. You won't be able to see LinkedIn connections with trustees of some of these foundations. So not ideal. And then the other tool that a lot of organizations use is 990s, looking up the 990s of foundations. Well, so it's helpful because you can see who they've given to, but you have to know the name of the foundation first. You have to know if it's even aligned with your organization and the mission and the work that you do. So great to research, but you need that. And I hope you all know that on GuideStar, you can find the 990s to most foundations and nonprofits. So you can do your research there, but not ideal. So if we think about foundation directory as sort of let's just say it's the backbone of all foundation research. It really is. And let's talk about where does their information come from? How do they even compile all of this? Well, they look at the websites of the grant makers. They look at annual reports. They go through RFPs, application guidelines, philanthropic press, federal government grants, and direct reporting from the grant makers. The issue is that much of their information is also derived from the IRS and some of these public guides and information. Some of it's outdated. So you may realize that what you see on Foundation Directory does not actually match the website accurately. I think in terms of mission and programs and priority areas, absolutely, yes. They're probably very closely aligned. But if you dig a little deeper, you might see that their application deadlines aren't correct. The giving amounts really don't match. So we just have to keep all of this in context. And what it means is you need to supplement your research. We cannot be wholly dependent on Foundation Directory. I'll give you a really good example, and this is kind of eye-opening. If you go on Foundation Directory and you have typed in your criteria and your filters, and you find an organization, a foundation, a grant-making foundation, so not a private family, but one that's listed on Foundation Directory that perhaps has a website that is actively, and we call it competitive grants. Competitive grants is when you submit an LOI and a proposal, as opposed to discretionary granting, where maybe a family foundation, you meet someone and they say, oh, I have a family foundation, we'd love to give you some money. They give you some money, easy peasy, right? Maybe you just give them a letter, you give them an annual report. But this is competitive grant making, where they're actually evaluating you against other organizations that are applying for funding. So if we think about that process and we find a foundation that has historically given, let's say, to children and education, children and education, children and education. It's been years and years, and you see all these nonprofits that have received funding from them. But you see one grant that was given 2 years ago to healthcare, something in healthcare, a big healthcare program, launching some sort of maybe free medical clinic in a particular area. Oh, wow. Well, my organization is focused on healthcare. This one looks like a great one. Here's the issue. That's an anomaly. So if you look at this and you see one of these anomalies, you have to question it, because many large foundations give their trustees the ability to give grants. So they say, as a trustee of this organization, if you donate a certain amount, we will match it and you can give it to the organization of your choice, as long as it's within maybe the geographic region. So let's say it's Miami-Dade County. And that person says, oh, great, I want to give it to my church. I want to give it to this healthcare program that's starting. Well, that is not a program of the foundation for the competitive grant making, but it shows up in foundation directory because they're compiling IRS data. And in the IRS data, it showed that they gave to this healthcare nonprofit. But you submitting a grant for healthcare, even you're convinced, you're like, yeah, but I know, but they gave to this. No. So that's the other thing, is you really have to be very selective, very, very careful and picky about these things. And because we don't want to waste our time. There are funders out there for you. Don't waste your time on the ones that aren't going to be a good fit. And keep in mind that there could be some of these discretionary gifts. And I know of one foundation in particular in Palm Beach County. This is what they do. And I have asked them point blank, and they explained the whole process to me. And that's how I first came to learn. All right, so let's go into starting your search. So starting your search is the reason this is so important, is because you are going to go into Foundation Directory, which we're going to do in a moment, and you're going to have to put some filters in. Who are you serving? Where are they? How much do you need? What are you doing for them? Do you have more than one program? Do you need operating funds or program funds? You want to be as specific as possible. And you also want to be thinking about the buckets. So, the more narrow you can be, the better, because then you can start to align in your mind and connect the dots. So if I just say childhood education is important to me, okay, but what's my program? Is it after school? Is it in school? A lot of foundations will not fund schools, right? So programs that are actually where you have to pay the school. So is it a separate program? Is your nonprofit providing it separately and paying for it separately and paying for the staff separately? So just start to get that all aligned. And then we're going to do our live demo now. And I just wanted to mention these three other options. So instrumental is $179 a year. It's 14-day trial for free. Grant Station is $179 a year with TechSoup. I like to have Foundation Directory and one other one. So Foundation Directory, you can access in many public libraries. You can access it at many universities as well. The challenge with that is that if you do go to one of these public areas, you really want to make sure that you export this and email it to yourself, because you won't have a way to download and print typically right on site. But let's go into Foundation Directory. And before I do that, does anyone have any questions on what we've talked about so far? All right. Okay, great. So share my screen. Okay. All right, so Foundation Directory. Okay, so this is the professional version of Foundation Directory. And we are going to go in here and we're going to look for funding. Now, the easiest way you can do this is you can just start typing into the search field. I feel that has not been incredibly beneficial to me. So I would much prefer to go in through advanced search filters. Now, the first thing you see is include US federal funders. If you are confident that you have the team and the ability to deliver on a federal grant, I encourage you to include US federal funders. But many organizations that are young or just getting started in the grant process are really not ready for federal funders. So you can uncheck that if that applies to you. I'm going to leave it in just so we can see what comes up. So let's click on, and by the way, if you do decide to go with one of these professional accounts, it will save results. You'll be able to go back to your projects. You can add in, all kinds of information. It's very, very helpful. But we're going to just go with, let's say we're looking for funding for our healthcare project. Okay, so, or maybe why don't we do medical instead? That's a little more specific. So we'll do medical, inpatient, to health and see what the options are there. Nothing under that. Okay, so the other option, if we don't find what we want, is we can just click on it and there's health. So let's talk about healthcare access. To me, that would be important. So let's imagine that I'm setting up a clinic that does not charge people for primary care, because I believe everyone should have access to healthcare and not have to worry about insurance and that sort of thing. So healthcare access. Okay, where are we looking? Well, we want to be as specific as possible. So rather than say, I'm going to use Florida as an example, because that's typically where I've done most of my work, but you can put in anywhere. So if we went into Florida, look at all of these options we have. So we'll start with Palm Beach County. Who is the population served? And is there anything about this group that is distinctive? So is there any particular ethnic or racial group? Are we talking about any of these individuals? Does this portion matter? Do they have disabilities already? Do we care about the religious group? Social economic status, that would be the one that would concern me the most, because I am looking for support for, let's just call it, economically disadvantaged individuals. And we don't have an organization name, and we're not going to type in recipient because we would be the recipient unless we knew of another nonprofit that was the recipient and we wanted to see what they've been accessing. Location of grant maker or recipient, I'm going to leave that blank as well. We don't necessarily need include grants to individuals. Grants to individuals are typically, we see that a lot in universities, research projects. A lot of PhDs are looking for grants to individuals. It's a totally different type of search, so we're not going to focus on that. So let's see what pops up. So healthcare access. All right. Now, these are important in the sense that, do we want everything that goes back to 2003? Let's do in the last 5 years. Let's see what funding there is. And we'll leave in the 10 billion, maybe not. Let's go back down here. We'll go down to, a little more reasonable. We'll just kind of pick something in the middle. And we don't need any keywords or anything. So we'll refine our search. We came up with 110 grant makers. 257 grants, 14 recipients. Now remember, this is our time frame, but this is important because if they gave grants in 2010, but they haven't given since then, we're not going to be the ones who are going to flip the switch and get them to start giving again. So now we have this list. The blue is always going to be the grant makers and the orange is the grants. I care about the grant makers. So we are always going to click on view all, and we are going to exclude grant makers not accepting applications. Why? Because right now we want the low-hanging fruit. We'll work on the other ones later, maybe through personal contact. There are other little tips and tricks, but which is interesting because now Foundation Directory says, do not disregard the prospects that don't accept unsolicited. I would say for now, you don't want those. So now we have 29. Okay, well, this is interesting. So if we look through this list, sorry, I've got my typical Chicago early morning allergies this morning. My apologies. So we have Quantum Foundation, Community Foundation, Allegheny Franciscan. So we have a number of them here, right? So let's just we'll pick one of these. And we now get a chart of what's being funded, where's the money going in the country. And even if I click on where in the state is it going, you'll see that it'll break it down, which is super helpful, because what if my organization serves Broward and Palm Beach County, right? So now I can actually see, oh, look, there were 16 grants, 7 recipients, $248,000. So this is very, very helpful. And it'll tell you the most common grant amount. So that's great information to have. And then this is the summary of the funding interests. The most important thing that I look for is I go down to the purpose and activity. So I always want to confirm what this information says. And sometimes you'll have other funders to consider. Sometimes they'll give you information on RFPs. They'll talk about the who's who. And sometimes these people have a LinkedIn profile and you can click on it. So this is a great way to just see overall, is this a good fit? Now let me go back. And by the way, if there are limitations on their funding, they will state it here. And we're going to find one that has that so you can see what that looks like. All right, so these are the subject areas that they fund. Now, remember I said sometimes FDO is not quite as accurate as we hope. So we have to always cross-check with their website. We know their geographic focus is Florida. Again, we saw other places on this map, right? No, not that one. Let's go back here for a second. Where were we? We were in trust. Okay, so we saw other states here, but see how it's only 1, 1, 2. So these were discretionary gifts. These were the foundation decided that they wanted to support that area. When they are asking for applications, they want them for the state of Florida. That is where they are funding, and that's their focus area. Let's see, population groups. So there we go, economically disadvantaged. Perfect. What are their support strategies? Continuing support, general support, program support. Perfect. So this one could be a very, very good fit. Then what we want to look at is at the bottom, we want to see how much information and what can we find out from this information? How much is there? So there is a phone number, there is a fax number, there's an email address, but they are basically they have a financial advisor, they have a wealth management team that is managing this fund, and it's at Bank of America. So you're not actually going to speak to William or Helen Thomas or any one of these individuals. Well, you might. Marilyn, no, they're not. See, not even Bonnie is on here. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Bonnie probably manages a handful of foundations. So it's not like you could just write to her or email her and say, hey, Bonnie, I had a question about the foundation. You're going to have to be very specific. William and Helen Thomas Charitable Trust. So if they list their information, that is, I'm not going to say it's an open invitation, but they're certainly open to having a conversation with you. You could communicate with them about something if you wanted to. Many of the ones that do not want to be contacted will not have any contact information, and that's for a reason. They get bombarded with requests and bombarded with inquiries. So we have to respect that. I will say, and maybe at the very end, I'll talk you through how to reach out and what conversation you should have with people. But I would say reserve your outreach to these individuals for very, very specific and important needs. We don't want to just start emailing people and say, hey, I was thinking of sending you, my proposal. Once you have done your research, once you've been on the website, once you've actually looked at the LOI format or the proposal format, once you've really done some homework and you have questions, you can say, I've looked through everything on Foundation Directory. I've looked at your website. I feel like I may still have some questions. And I wondered if I could run those by you really quickly on a phone call, or could I just submit them in an email? All right, so that would be a first kind of low-hanging fruit, excellent option in terms of funding. Let's look at another one. I'm deliberately staying away from Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all of those. Those are highly, highly, highly competitive. They're a little harder to get. They fund across the country. So I would say if you're getting started, you want to look at some of these organizations that are a little more local, geographic. They're focused on a particular area because they're concerned about that area. They want to make sure that that area is well funded and that the programs are making an impact. So now we have the Edward T. Bedford Foundation, which is their funds are held at the Bessemer Trust Company of Florida. And we have 120 recipients in the state of 44 in the state of Florida, 120 grants. We have information about the size, what's being funded. So human health is often very closely connected to human services. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that you may find a little bit of overlap. Maybe you have education, but also arts and culture as part of your mission. So you can sort of bounce back and forth and look at those. So let's go down to their geographic focus. Oh, interesting. So they've got California, Colorado, Florida, and Virginia. All right. And do we have health or human services in here? We have human services. We have hospice care, family services. I don't see the word health specifically. Doesn't mean that they don't fund it, but we're not seeing that right off the bat. Okay, application RFP information. This is great. They're actually providing that. Here are the giving limitations. This is what you're always looking for right away. I almost always scroll straight down to this. The co-trustees presently have particular interest in supporting organizations benefiting children and young adults, including through educational, athletic, and artistic pursuits, and through social service enterprises. So it doesn't say necessarily medical, so that might be a drawback, but we're going to wait and see who we know or who we see as the nonprofit organizations that they're funding, and then we'll make a little bit of a decision there. There is a phone number, there is a website. Excellent. Now, what does it mean when there's no deadline? Does everyone know what that means? That typically means that they fund on a rolling basis. It means that their board maybe meets 4 times a year, and that's when they review grant applications, or twice a year. So that means you can submit at any time, but just know that you may not make it this quarter, it may be next quarter. You don't know what the cutoff is necessarily. So until you have a little more information, we just have to sort of assume that now they do say application format and cover sheet is on the foundation website. So hopefully that has a little more information. But this is great because it gives you an overview. Now, at this point, when they're asking for additional sources and amount of support, current year organizational budget, descriptive literature, IRS determination, brief history of organization, description of the mission, and a detailed description of the project and amount of funding. This is interesting. We'll have to see what the website says, but this is almost like a combination letter of interest or letter of intent along with proposal, because it's not completely detailed and specific, but it's more than you would include in just a letter of interest, which would be maybe a 2 to 3 page maximum letter that you're sending in. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. And then again, we do have some information. So let's go to their website really quickly and just, oh, well, that looks like they've got that listed incorrectly here. That's interesting. I would think that that would be a, all right, so Edward Foundation. There we go. Okay, so it was the ORG that was missing. All right, so here is the 2023 grant application, which is helpful because it's 2023. We could look at that and see what's involved. And here is more information. Okay, this is very similar to what we saw on Foundation Directory. And they're saying they're reviewed on a rolling basis, but generally considered and decided upon within 90 days. Interesting. Okay. And you can submit it online. So this would be one that's open all the time. And you could just pop in there and go ahead and explore that and submit something if it was a good fit. Let's take a look at who they are funding. Now, Caridad Center is an organization. Whoops. Let's go back. Oh, so we only have Caridad for medical. Okay, that's interesting. So maybe not such a good, but they're subject with equal opportunity in education. Okay, so Caridad Center is one of these free medical centers that provides access to people who are, disadvantaged. And they're in Boynton Beach, but they requested funding for equal opportunity in education, not for medical. So if I'm looking for medical and I see this, I'm thinking, okay, that's Caridad Center is probably why this foundation came up in my request, but I'm not convinced that this is enough. So what we can do is we can clear the search filters, and now we can look at all of the funding that they've given. And because before it was only for the medical. So now we're looking at everything. What else have they funded? And I look at this and I say, okay, I do see a lot of athletic. I see some nature. You know what? Probably not such a good fit for my organization. Not if I am looking specifically for medical. So that's why it's so important to really be very discerning and almost hypercritical, right? Like you're almost hypercritical. You're like, really? And if we think about this, when I do my research, I am looking for my net search results. I would like to come up with about 25 to 30 funders. That's my goal. If I sit down, I'm like, I'm going to do my grant research. I'm just going to knock it all out. I'm looking for 25 to 30 funders. To get to 25 to 30 funders, I need between 300 and 500 foundations to come up in my search. So we didn't have that number. We started out with, how many did we start out? We started out with 29. So here's an option. We can start playing with our filters a little bit. So what if we just put South Florida? Because remember, this is all database matching. And maybe funders have put Palm Beach County, Broward County, other counties, but Palm Beach County is what came up. But maybe South Florida will yield more results. So again, just be persistent and keep looking. So now we have 166, but we need to make sure we remove the ones that are not accepting applications. Oops. And what do we have here? Now we have 50. Okay, 50 is better. This is great. What if we change healthcare access and we put human services? Health is definitely within the bucket of human services. Let's see what comes up. 4,122. Let's filter that again. Exclude. And now we have 929. Now that's a little more than I want to spend the time looking through. Typically it takes me about an hour and a half to get through 100 if I'm flipping through. So just to give you an idea. So now I'm going to go back to Palm Beach County because I don't want to do 900. I really would like to. Now I could be very happy with my 29 and get started with those. Absolutely. And maybe that'll yield me 3 or 4 great ones. Perfect. So now we have 1397. Let's exclude. Okay. And what do we have now? 327. I love that number. 327 is a great number. So if I were embarking today on a grant research project, I have 2 screens, so forgive me if I look in different directions. I'm looking at all of you. If I decided today, I'm going to get started on my grant research and I'm just going to commit to this, I'm going to put my time in it, I'm going to do it from beginning to end and come out of this with my results, this is what I would do. I would do what I just did. I would play with it a little bit. Now, the one thing we could do here is we could remove the US federal funders because maybe I'm not quite ready for a federal grant, which by the way, sometimes requires that you hire a whole other team to manage it. So lots to be considered in those processes. Okay, now I'm at 325. Okay, so 325 is very doable. And again, right off the bat, I'm not going to go for Wells Fargo. If I am a nonprofit, let's say I have a budget of 250,000, 100,000. I'm somewhere between 0 and 200,000. I'm not going to invest the time and energy in a Wells Fargo Foundation grant because I am probably not going to be selected. It also depends on your GuideStar profile. Are you platinum? Do you have audited financials? You know, there are a lot of things that are going to really make a big difference in this. So I would eliminate some of those right off the bat, and I would be looking more for, I wouldn't do Truist, I wouldn't do American Express. Oh, here's another really important thing. Community foundations that are not in your geographic region. I would not waste my time with those. Community foundations that fund in the geographic region that you're in, but they are based elsewhere, typically have embarked on a specific program, or it's a donor advised fund and the donor has directed the funds to a particular nonprofit in that area. It does not mean, oh, look, the Southeast Michigan Community Foundation funds in Palm Beach County. No, they probably don't. So I wouldn't waste my time with them. It'll be a one-off. Maybe Palm Beach County was hit by a natural disaster and the community foundation came together and decided to fund, or they had donor advised funds that they sent there, but I wouldn't waste my time with that. Cornelia Bailey, great one. Mashik Family Foundation, you know, we're always also looking at the amounts here as well, right? So let's not worry too much about the total assets and total giving, but let's look at amount funded, you know, these grants. Again, we're also looking at high numbers of grants. That's what we want because our years, we had put in the last 5 years, right? So we're looking at high numbers. Oh, Jim Moran looks really good. Quantum Foundation looks really good. Lost Tree Village, Allegheny Franciscan. Again, Wells Fargo, we're going to skip for now. William and Helen Thomas. So that's really, and again, if you start to narrow it down that way, and as you get down to the bottom, you see that there are fewer and fewer that were funded in the last 5 years. I wouldn't spend too much time on these. I really want to focus on these top ones and then keep playing with my language. Your organization may, for example, have 3 different programs, and it all has to do with children. One could be a healthcare program because we provide dental screening and eye screening for children in our after-school program. One could be education. One could be arts because we're teaching them music. Well, now you have 3 different areas that you can actually search under. So if you compile the 5 or so you found here and the 5 or so you found in arts and the 10 that you found in education, you might come up with a nice little list. And again, if you're thinking about those buckets, right? Think about your buckets of programming. And each program should almost be its own little mini organization within your larger organization. So it has its own budget. It has its own allocation of time. Your staff is allocating a certain amount of time to that particular program. It has its own expenditures. And so if you keep them nice and separate, it'll just make it easier as you're looking for this funding. Okay, so let me look at my notes and just make sure that I didn't miss anything. So be hyper specific. Okay, and then, you know, again, the most important thing is export your results and save them, because the worst thing you can do is sit down and start doing your research, and then you chip away at it, and then you decide to come back to it, and you have to start all over again because you can't remember where you were. Foundation directory doesn't track it for you automatically. You're like, oh, where was I? Where was I? And now I'm looking all over again at the same foundations. So we don't want to waste time with that. Try and sit down and do a block of it at a time, export your results, start organizing it. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Just what do I do with these funders once I've found them? Any questions so far?
Kirsten, the best way to contact, will it be to contact the funder, will it be via email, just regular mail, via phone? What would you suggest we do?
I suggest, depending on what you see on the information, right, where we saw the listed information, some of them aren't going to have a phone number, they'll just have an email. Some of them are just going to have a website. I recommend starting with an email and use that as your segue so that you can go back to them or go to them in a week, maybe with a phone call, and you say, I'm following up on my email from last week. I know you're very busy, but I just wanted to double check with you on a couple of these things. Now, that conversation is really, really important. These people are very busy. They don't have a lot of time. And if you're getting close to submission deadlines, they especially don't have a lot of time. So you want to be very succinct. And you want to say right off the bat, I have reviewed your website. I have reviewed your guidelines. I have found you on Foundation Directory. You seem very aligned with our organization. This is my question, or this is my concern. And so try and acknowledge right off the bat, because the first thing they're going to say is, did you go to my website? Did you find us on FDO? Did you look at the RFP? Did you look at the guidelines? Yes, I'm very clear on the guidelines, but it was a little confusing because I noticed the application deadline said June 30th. On Foundation Directory, it says you fund 4 times a year. I just wanted to see if maybe you could offer some clarity on that. So I would say use the email as your intro and follow up with a phone call if you don't hear from them. And by the way, very, very common not to hear from them. Very, very, very common. So this may take a couple of emails and a phone call. You know, you may have to get a little creative there with how you reach out.
That was going to be my next question. How long do they take on average to get back to you if they get back to you? Okay.
Yeah, it could be weeks.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lisa.
Thank you. You mentioned that it takes you about an hour and a half or so to go through about 100 funders, but you've been doing this for a long time. For those of us who would be just starting out and navigating this, would you anticipate maybe 2.5 hours to go through 100 because we are not attuned to that?
Yes.
From an allocated resource? Okay.
Yes. And it depends as well if you are you going to look at it and then go straight to the website so you can just eliminate it right away? Or did you want to come up with your list and then in a separate session, go and look at websites, which that might not be a bad idea because considering how you sometimes restart this, like you don't want to restart and be looking at them in let's say you go to the library and you have access to the Foundation Directory Professional and you start your search and then you had to stop because you had to leave and you didn't complete it because you started going into websites. The next time you go back to the library, guess what? You get the same list. And you're like, I can't remember which one did I. So it's almost better to come up with the main list first and then go back and look at websites. Yeah.
So am I hearing you say that the public library allows access to Foundation Directory Professional?
Yes. And if you Google it and type in which libraries provide access to Foundation Directory Professional, it'll give you a list.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes. I haven't done that recently, but I know they do. And I think Nova Southeastern University offers access. And I know Lynn University, I'm not sure if they still do to the public. They were doing that during COVID, but there are a number of universities that will also offer access.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to continue. So then what happens once you have your funders? So you're going to check their websites, look at the prior grantees. That's really important. Look at the prior grantees. See who they have funded. Go into their websites. Go look them up on GuideStar. Look at their 990s. Do some digging. You know, if you find an organization that's similar to yours and they have gotten funding from this foundation, fabulous. Are they similar? Is it a similar program? What do the expenses look like? What does their staffing look like? What does their overhead look like? So this is important. Sign up for notifications. Many of them have a way you can sign up to be notified when they have, for example, a grant training or the release of an RFP, or they're making announcements about their application program. So always sign up for notifications. And then some of them have events as well, or they're associated with different events. So just keep an eye on those things. Get organized. So everything needs to be kept somewhere. I use a spreadsheet. And when we have done grant research projects for clients in the past, we provide them with a workbook that has, on the first page, it has the calendar. So it has, let's say 30. Let's say we found 30 funders. It has the 30 funders. It has the months, and it says which are the deadlines. And at the end, it says the rolling deadline. So I always look at that, because obviously if I have deadlines coming up in September, so the ones I want to focus on first, oh, there's an October. Great. So I slot that into my annual development plan or my development plan or my grant calendar for myself. So make sure that you're keeping all of that information as far as the timing. On the next page, I will provide the full list of grants that are available, or the foundations that are available, and I rank them. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Which one looks like a shoe-in? I'll put that one first. Maybe the Edward Bedford, right? So if that was the one that I thought, oh yeah, that was the definite yes, I'm going to make that my Tier 1. Then I have my Tier 2s and my Tier 3. Tier 3 might be, it looks really good, but you know what? I feel like I have too many questions about this. I'm going to have to talk to someone or send an email. So we'll put that off. What we want is the ones we can tackle right away, immediately. So those are the ones in the 2s. So I tier them. And, you know, if you can be systematic, if you keep it in a Google Sheet so that you can constantly update it and you can share it with your team or with your board members, or whoever's helping you, volunteers, it can be a really effective way to track this. The due dates for LOIs and proposals can be a little confusing. Sometimes it just says application deadline, and what they're referring to is a letter of inquiry, letter of interest, letter of intent. Sometimes it means the proposal. So just make sure that you've gone on the website, you have a good understanding of what it is that they're expecting. Amounts given. Are the amounts being given in line with what you're looking for? If they predominantly give gifts of $1,000 and you know you need 20, it's probably not going to be a great start. Now, if it's the first grant you've ever written, there could be some benefit to going after a grant for $1,000, because what you want to do is build up a portfolio of funders. Who cares if it's 1,000? If you get 5 of those, you have 5,000. Now you have 5 funders that you can list as your additional supporters. Because remember, when we looked at those application guidelines, it said, who else is funding you? Where else are you getting funding from? They don't want to be the only one. So you have to start somewhere. And what I tell people too is, if you're really stuck and you're starting from zero, go to Walmart, go to Home Depot, go to go to Home Depot, go to Publix, go to the big grocery stores, go to some of the big chains. They all give charitable contributions. Even if it's a small amount, it doesn't matter. $50 from Walmart, $100 from Home Depot, doesn't matter. Go ahead and start building your arsenal of funders. Maybe there's some local, maybe there's Kiwanis or Rotary, and they give small grants. Maybe there's volunteer in-kind exchange for time, right? What you want is a portfolio of funders that you can demonstrate are funding you. Doesn't matter the amount. They've invested in you. They've committed to you. It's a good thing to be able to demonstrate. Let's see. Oh, yes. Make sure you look through the trustee and director lists of funders. Remember, at the bottom, we saw that they had the list of trustees. At the next board meeting, you should bring that list and ask your board of directors if anyone knows of any of these individuals. Have they met them before? Do they know someone who works at that bank or who works at that law practice? Because it will make a difference. And here's how it makes a difference. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a shoe-in for that grant, okay? What it does mean is that if that trustee can put in a good word and your application comes through and it's already on their radar, there's a chance it'll be more seriously considered than otherwise. It's worth it. You just never know who people know. And some of us have very powerful boards. We have very powerful people and we may not leverage them as well as we could. So this is a great opportunity to see if these trustees, if there's any connection socially, if they go to charity galas together, you just never know. Lisa, did you have another question?
I did.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So for the sake of the group, I just looked it up online. The Alvin Sherman Library is the only place you can access the Foundation Directory Online Professional. So just wanted to share that.
Where is that located, Lisa?
That's Nova's.
Yeah, that's Nova's.
Nova. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
I'll put it in the chat for
Did
everybody.
you look up public libraries?
I did, Broward County.
Okay, I think Palm Beach
Yeah.
County has a number of them.
Yeah, this
Least
one is the
one.
only one in Broward County, so.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Kristen, there's also a good question in the chat, since we're on the topic of who our funders are to get started. Dustin from West Care just brought up, if we get a $500 donation from a corporation, but it's not a grant, can we still use that as a funder on our grant application?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Does not have to be a charitable foundation. I would say that's a funder. Absolutely. Yep. It comes into you as a donation. So yes, 100%. I would. Okay. So we're just going to run through then some last tips on the evaluating the prospects. So we already talked a little bit about all of this. All right, we've already looked at that. Okay, so tips for making this really, really successful. Dedicate a good block of time in one sitting. I would say minimum 2 hours. Minimum 2 hours, sit down and just, really focus on that. Get creative. Okay, so I found another nonprofit that keeps coming up, Caridad Center, perfect example, kept on coming up. Well, guess what I'm going to do? I can go into Foundation Directory and look up Caridad Center and see every funder that has ever funded them. That's golden, because now I have a whole new list of funders that I can look through. So we have to get creative, and you may feel like you're going down the rabbit hole, and you are sometimes, but that's what it takes. Sometimes we have to go down the rabbit hole. So look at who is funding the other nonprofits as well. If you see their name come up over and over again, this is interesting. Let me find out why they're getting all this funding and who is funding them, more importantly. Be very selective. Make sure you document everything. And then as you get more sophisticated, you really do want to look at maybe some kind of grant management tool if it's appropriate for you. They tend to be a little expensive. I'm always really happy with the spreadsheet for the first, the first round or a couple of rounds of grants and grant research, but it's something to consider. Let's see. Do not try to create programs to match the grants. That is a very big mistake. Oh, they have a grant for an after-school tennis clinic. I've always wanted to do that. Let me create a program. Not a good idea. It's just not solid enough. If it's not already part of your core mission, I would not try to do that. Now, you can tuck that away for the future, for next year when you launch your tennis program or your gymnastics program or whatever it may be, but do not try to just fit into what you see that is being required by the funder. Make sure you share your findings with your team and your board and your volunteers, because we just never know what people know. Maybe there's a volunteer who worked at an organization before that was funded by that particular funder and knows the funder or knows some insight on them. So share your findings. Let's see. Oh, and then also, there's a lot of trepidation on submitting some of these applications to funders that they look like they fund bigger projects. Maybe they fund $30,000 projects and up. Something that you could consider is partnering with another 501c3. Funders love partnerships. They love to see nonprofits coming together and partnering. So let's say mine is a young organization. I'm only a year old. And by the way, funders do typically look at to see how long you've been in existence. For the most part, they're looking for 2 to 3 years of being in existence. And, you will need to have some things in order, which we'll talk about in a moment, but they're looking for a little bit of a history, a little bit of a track record of just existence. And I would say one of the greatest ways that you could leverage this and you could actually get some traction if you otherwise couldn't, would be to partner with another 501c3. So think about that as an option. You could also be fiscally sponsored. If you're in your first year, You could be fiscally sponsored by another 501c3. Doesn't matter that you already have your own 501c3. They can still fiscally sponsor you for a particular program, and then they receive the funds and you become almost a program of theirs. But it gives you an opportunity, because then in your next application, you can say, we were fiscally sponsored and worked with such and such foundation. And again, you can leverage it, right? We're building that portfolio. That's really, really important. Okay, so let's talk about your document repository. Well, first of all, I said I promised a little break. Should we take a little 5-minute break, or should we continue? It's up to all of you. Can we get a show of hands if you'd like to stop, or should we just keep going?
We can, yeah, let's take a quick break, a quick pause. Yeah, a couple minutes.
Okay, great. So we'll take like a 2 to 3 minute break, and just when you come back, you come back. I'm just going to jump back in. If anyone has any questions during the break, I'm happy to stay on and talk.
I have a couple of questions.
Hey, Vicky.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So I want to piggyback on what you said about Publix and all of that. When we were first starting, we did get very small grants from Publix, Aldi, and Walmart, and that helped us build, all of that. And I saw something on the last slide about a grant management tool. So I want to sort of take it's a very personal question, but it may very well apply to others that are here. I'm curious. I know you've written a million grants during your career. I just had a really bad experience with a grant writer, unfortunately. And I just, I want to know what your feeling is like. I mean, I thought I had done the vetting correctly. She's written for major organizations in our area to the tune of, over $1 million, tremendous success rate. First of all, is it best practices that a grant writer would then send the application to the client first before submitting it to the foundation?
This is a really important question, Vicki. Very, very important question.
That's what happened to us, which is why I'm bringing it up. I think everybody needs to, I'm not going to name any names, so you can ask all you want, anybody, but I'm not going to give the name. This person sent 3 grants out without us getting eyes on it. And there were some critical errors in it. So I had to do my backup, and I took it upon myself to contact the funders. It's basically a letter of apology, letting them know that it was sent without our approval, and that it went that it basically goes against industry standards. But how could I have prevented that?
Well, there are a couple of things. From a purely legal and ethical perspective, a grant writer who submits on your behalf without your approval and perhaps under their own name, I'm not sure how that, maybe their own email address, I don't know if they're a consultant, they actually are fundraising. They now need to be registered themselves for their solicitation of contributions registration with, let's say, the state of Florida. It's in most states. If you are fundraising, you need to register. When I wrote grants, I chose not to do that because I didn't want to have to submit every time I had a contract, submit that to the Department of Agriculture for approval, or not approval, but for them to be aware. So if someone is submitting grant proposals and it's without you having seen it. Well, I was going to say, even if there was a staff member, that would happen, but that wouldn't happen. Even if they're a staff member employed by your organization, they should never submit something that has not been reviewed by someone else within the organization who has the authority to say, send it. And I don't care, Vicki, if you don't have time, right? You scan it and you say, you know what? You did the last 5. They were great. We're good to go. Now, if this is an external consultant, absolutely not. Absolutely not. In fact, there are some very serious ethical issues, in my view, on that, because they could take such liberties with the representation and you detected errors. So the terms of your arrangement with the consultant have to be very clear up front. You have to understand, are they registered as a fundraiser? Are they going to put their name on it as the grant writer, or are they representing your organization? And so the way I viewed it was I was a ghostwriter, basically. I was a ghostwriter, and most of my clients loved it. That's what they wanted. They wanted someone to create the content. I give it to them. They bless it. They add a little something to it or not. And they go, good, we're going to submit. And here's why I liked it. It's now in their control. If they missed the deadline, but I prepared it on time, I'm sorry, but I gave it to you to submit. There were times when they would say, we authorize you to submit in the online portal because we're worried we're not going to get it in on time. What if there's a glitch in the system? What great. So, because a lot of organizations will submit at the last minute and then the online system gets overloaded and then there's a breakdown and you don't get it in on time. So, there are a lot of variables, but right off the bat, I would say, Vicki, absolutely not. No grant writer, this is for all of you, should ever submit on your behalf without you setting eyes on it or someone in your organization approving it and blessing it. If they are not registered as a fundraiser, they can't do that anyway. It needs to come from you, from your organization. You can be the ghostwriter, they can be the ghostwriter. They can run it back and forth with you. And that's what surprises me too about this, because it doesn't sound like there was much back and forth.
So this person is registered with Department of Ag.
Okay.
And was represented as our ghostwriter. And everything should have come from my email address. So that, from the company email address.
Correct.
Clearly it didn't. And it kind of I lost 2 days.
I'm sure.
Trying to
I'm sure it is very stressful, and you lose control of the process, which is even more important, because if it's not coming to your email address, how do you even know they received it? They acknowledged it. They're writing back to you, right? So, I mean, you may choose to put grants at, I can't remember the full name of your organization, but
Alliance of Women Executives.
allianceforwomenexecutives.org. You may create an email address for them to use, but absolutely they should not be using their own email address. Absolutely not. So lots of lessons learned there. And I'm sorry that was painful, but it's good for everyone to hear. These are
it really is. I mean, grant writing is difficult. It is time consuming, obviously. I've gotten pretty good at it. Copy and paste is my friend.
Yeah.
AI, thank you to Danny. AI is my very good friend.
Yep.
But it is exhausting.
It is.
Those 2 or 3 hours that turn into 4 or 5, right?
Exactly. And you think you can just whip it out on a Sunday afternoon. You're like, oh my goodness, I have 4 more parts that I still need to gather. Or yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for,
of course,
it's a little personal, but
absolutely.
I think it should benefit everybody.
It does benefit everyone. And I was going to talk a little bit at the end about hiring a grant writer. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Yep, absolutely. Okay. So if you want to prepare to be ready to start submitting, you want to make sure that you have your document repository. What does that mean? It means a Google Drive or Dropbox or something where you have started to collect materials, your most recent financial audit or your 990s. And by the way, on the 990 topic, when we are a young organization getting started, what we hear from everyone is, oh, if you're under 50,000 in revenue this year, you could just submit a postcard. That's fine. But guess what? There's no financial history for you that's been registered with the IRS. I encourage people, I don't care if you brought in $20,000, do a 990 easy so that there's some IRS recognized financial documentation of your financial history. And you want to start building that track record. Your letter of determination, your charitable solicitation or solicitation of contributions with the Department of Agriculture or Revenue or in whatever state you're in, your updated organization mission statement, so whatever is the most current version of that, background information on the board of directors. You'd be surprised how many times they ask this, and they'll ask what their involvement is in the community, maybe, even employment. They'll ask for some demographic information, perhaps on board of directors. One of the really important things that a lot of them ask, I saw this more in North Carolina, I don't see it so much in Florida, is they'll ask if there is 100% board giving. So even if your board members are not in a position to give a stretch gift that could be $1,000 or $5,000, but they give 50 or 100, every board member has to give, because you just never know when this is going to come up. And it's also a demonstration of their commitment and investment in the organization. Outcome measures and statistics, if you have those, you need to start building those. Your case for support should be in there, which, by the way, your case for support can be repurposed and used for a lot of grant proposals. So super helpful if you're using AI. Your program budget. So remember, we talked about those buckets. And then your organizational bucket, or organizational budget. So we need to know how much of the program budget is the organization, or yes, how much of this organizational budget does this program budget represent? Press releases, newspaper articles, photos, videos, testimonials, past grant proposals, annual reports, and brochures. And the idea is have it all in one place. What if it's not you? Vicki, what if it's someone else? What if somebody volunteers, they come tomorrow and they're your best friend and they happen to have all this grant writing experience, and you can say, look, here it all is, and here's the grant. Can you work on it for me? So have your document repository in good shape. And you may not have everything up front, but just start gathering as much as you can. Okay. The grant process. So these are the key areas. We're looking to evoke emotion always. We need a pull. We need some kind of emotional tug that comes with this grant application. We want to demonstrate impact. We have to make them feel like you are an organization that knows what it's doing. There's a question on the CFRE exam, the Certified Fundraising Executive, which is administered by AFP, and that's the certification that I hold. And it says, I can't remember what the other responses are, but it says, which one do you think a foundation is more likely to fund? An organization that is coming out of the red and starting to show improvement, an organization with a solid financial history, an organization on the verge of greatness. The answer is on the verge of greatness, because everyone wants to be part of something that's about to become magnificent, right? And funders do too. I mean, funders, those organizations are made up of people who read your grant report or your grant application. And so what are we inspiring in them? We're inspiring a sense that, wow, do you know how many lives we could touch if we got this grant for $25,000? How we can stretch these funds and impact 564 children during the course of this year alone? So, and I'm not saying overblow, I'm not saying exaggerate, I'm not saying magnify inappropriately. I'm saying they want to be part of something that's going to be successful. So let's make sure that we convey that. The ripple effect is who else is being impacted? Okay, it's the children, but is it the children's parents, their cousins, their friends, their whole community, their neighborhood? Show the ripple effect. Super, super important. And then get input. So let me just look through my notes here because I want to make sure I made some extra notes. Some of the important things that you should be mentioning. Why was the organization started in the first place? What was the need? How did this even come about? Why are you in existence? Whose lives are you changing? Make sure you are completely honest and authentic. And if you can, use some infographics because the visuals will really stand out. And there are often opportunities to include attachments. You want to be judicious about that and not overwhelm them with too much material, but you definitely want to be sure that you include as much as you can. All right, so let's go into the building relationships. Oh, Edward, yes, Eduardo, question.
Kirsten, will you have the ability to send us a grant that either you've written or somebody else for us as an example of a well-written grant?
Yes.
Beautiful.
I'll send you an LOI and a grant. Just give me a couple days so that I can redact it and
take all the time in the world.
Okay, perfect. I'll have AI help me with that. Okay, so funders by nature, we have this very strange relationship with funders. It's a little, I'm not going to say adversarial. It's not adversarial. It's a power dynamic. It's a power dynamic. And we have to put that aside because we are not coming begging for money. We are matching their criteria with our need. We are worthy, we are doing great work, and we deserve to be funded. And here's why. So they want to get to know you. They want to trust you. They really, you must make sure that you are presenting yourself not in this sort of very humble way, but that you, and of course, on the other side, you don't want to be overly, egotistical about this, but be clear about how honorable and worthy your work is. You've made it this far. So we want to approach this, I'm not going to say as equals, because we're not necessarily equals, but whether your application is approved or declined, you will gain insight from this. You will learn from this. You will find out what the funder is aligned with or not. And that brings me to, and I'm not sure if I mention it later on, you should always find out why you were declined. Always, without fail. You may get a brush off, you may get an email. We get so many requests for funding, that we can't possibly fund all of the requests. Okay, but make the effort. Find a way, see if you can find a way to find out why you were declined. And then even after you submit the application, I would say stay connected. Whether you're approved or declined, you're going to find out if you were declined. If you're approved, you want to stay connected. You want to make sure they know there are guidelines in some of these grant agreements about, emailing them, inviting them to events. A lot of funders will not come to events that you invite them to. They just don't, either they're not able to because of time, or they just don't feel it's appropriate to show, particular alignment with organizations. But you should be sending them your newsletter. You should be sending them an annual report, unsolicited. You should be communicating with them in an unsolicited manner. Solicited is going to be, you have a grant report at 6 months and you have a grant report at 12 months. And boy, you better get those in, and you better get them in on time. But unsolicited, absolutely send them. So what if they don't look at it? So what if they don't open it? What if they do? What if they do and they print it out and they share it at the next grants committee meeting? Do you know how you look? You look like a superstar. It doesn't take much. It should be, if you're sending a stewardship report to your donors anyway, your top 10 donors, your top 5 donors, send one to, I made it a practice always to include all of the funders in every organization I've worked, in every experience I've had with funding. I make sure to always include them. I would rather they tell me, Kirsten, it's a little too much, than not send it and think, oh, I don't want to intrude, it's the almighty foundation. Let me not bother them with my little report. No, send it. So feel empowered about this. Let's see. So you are 5 times more likely to get funded if you have reached out to a funder to connect and you've been successful. We talked about not being successful. That happens, but you are actually much more likely to get funded if you reach out. So it's worth the effort. You just never know. You may catch them on a day when they pick up the phone. You may catch them on if they have a training session, if it's a community foundation or Impact 100 or an organization that offers grant training, which many of them do, or not even the training, but sort of the grant guidelines, right, for their funding process. Go to every single one of them and make an effort. Stay after, introduce yourself, plant the seed, get a connection with them. Think of something very unique and interesting that you can mention in that meeting. If they don't have contact information, don't be a sleuth and try and find it. It really means that they just do not wish to hear from applicants. Okay, we talked about how to handle the call. Save yourself from wasting time. Make sure, here's really important. If you decide to submit a grant proposal or an LOI and something changes, you must inform the funder, even if you've submitted your application. Let's say your program was going to cost you $200,000. You are approaching 4 funders. And by the way, disclose the other people that you're applying to, whether you've gotten the money or not. Disclose it. Yes, we are applying to the Jim Moran Foundation, the Community Foundation, and Quantum Foundation, as well as Edward T. Bedford. Let them know and let them know how much you're requesting. Let's say that a private donor has stepped up to fund the entire program for $200,000. You have a responsibility. That program you said was going to cost $200,000. Now you're not going to grow it by $200,000. You're not going to make it a $400,000 program. That wouldn't even fit. That is so out of scope. It wouldn't even fit in your strategic plan for the year, because you said this program was going to be $200,000 for 2025. So if something significant changes, let's say the program falls through, you're not able to do it anymore. You owe it to the funder to let them know. Don't let them approve you and then you're scrambling. You're like, uh-oh, what do we do now? Now we need to go back and tell them that we're not doing that one, but we're doing this one. Maybe they like this one. You owe it to them. At the risk of losing the funding, you must be completely upfront. Do not be shy about that. That's really, really, really important. Let's see. Okay. Establishing timelines. All right, so I always work backwards from the application deadline. Really, really important. Give yourself plenty of time. For some people, that may be 30 days. For other people, that may be more. Remember that you have to review it very carefully. There are grant proposals that'll be 50 or 60 pages by the time you compile all of the. My first one that I told you was 250,000 was a 56-page document that I submitted. So I ended up having to read through the entire thing and check it. And so you need to make sure that you devote enough time to this process. Your grammar and spelling must be impeccable. Run it through AI to check for spelling and grammar mistakes. And then on the timing, make sure that you have identified early on who's doing what part of this. There may be someone who's researching a particular section. There's maybe somebody who's working on the budget, somebody who does your bookkeeping or your finances, and they're working on the budget. Who's going to be your final editor? Who is the last person to set eyes on this? And just to let you know, I've had my best friend, I've had my sister, I've had my mother review my grants for me because I'm like, Mommy, it's Saturday night. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get this delivered by Monday morning. Please take a look at this. I just need one more set of eyes. When you have looked at this over and over and over again, you start to miss your own mistakes. Maybe you didn't interpret a question properly. Maybe my mom comes back and says, but this is weird because you talk about this, but they were asking about the history of the organization. I don't see the history of the organization. You just kind of jumped in and assumed they knew it. Oh, yeah, I did. So find an editor, find somebody who's going to lay eyes on it for you. So it's not just the grammar, it's also the flow of the information. Be very clear on when you're going to submit and when other people need to have their parts ready for you. Make sure you understand how it's going to be submitted. If it's an online portal, you need to set up your account early, and you need to research that system to make sure that you're clear on it. And here's a tip for you. Funders will look at partially submitted, partially completed applications in online portals. I had a horrendous shock about 10 years ago in North Carolina. I was working on a grant proposal, and I received a call from the funder who said, oh, I've been watching your work in our online portal. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels like being in college and submitting a paper before it was ready. Like that was my draft. And then we were changing, like, oh my goodness, it was so humiliating. But it turned out to be to my benefit, because she said, I just want you to know that what you're asking for, I don't know that we're going to be funding it. We were asking for a capital expenditure to buy a bus. This was to deliver fresh produce to families in need. So families that really didn't have the capacity to go out and buy fresh produce. And so it was a truck that delivers to certain areas, and the families could come and gather for free any produce that they want. And she said, what other programs do you have? What other things are you looking for funding for? So we went through a couple, and I suggested one or two, and she said, you know what, that's the one that I think you'll get the funding for. The truck is a little too much. I think that's a bit too risky for us. Great, well, it worked in my favor, but holy cow, I learned a lesson. Prepare the whole thing in a Word document first, make it perfect, and then you copy and paste and upload it into the system. And I realize that you have character limits and everything. You're just going to have to figure out what those character limits are and work within that. but don't leave a partially completed draft or start it and then abandon it. Don't do that in online portals because they check. Yeah, not fun. Okay. The letter of inquiry. Sometimes this could be even more important than the proposal itself, because this is your opportunity to really get the attention of this funder. So what do you want that to look like? How is that going to be powerful? A story is very powerful. A personal story from the founder is very powerful. So something that leads into this. Yes, you want a general overview of the organization. You don't want to overwhelm with information. This is an introductory letter of inquiry. Many of these websites will say what they'd like you to include in this LOI. Sometimes they don't call it an LOI. They'll just say, send a letter. Well, that's what this is. So really think about how you want to present the organization. This is more about you presenting who you are, making that, remember we talked about that emotion, evoking emotion, those goosebump moments. Started out with maybe saying, Maria is a little girl that, struggled for many days with concentrating at school because there was no food at home. And then you could close it out and you could say, remember Maria? Maria is thriving today. She is now an active 6th grader and she's getting straight A's. And it's all because of the work that we do. So think of ways that this doesn't have to be a clinical formal document. This can have some humanity to it. And it should, it really should. Then when we're thinking about the proposal, we're expanding on that story. And we're making sure that we have, all that we need. We talked about that document repository. Don't cut corners. You cannot cut corners with your proposal. If you don't have something, you are not ready to submit. You can't just say, oh, well. Now, if it specifically says audited financials, many organizations will accept either 990s or they'll accept the 990 easy, right? Not the postcard, or they'll accept reviewed financials. Reviewed financials is like the step under audited. And it comes from a CPA. It's less expensive. It's about half the cost. It's worth looking into. This might be a question that you could ask a funder if you see that it says audited financials. I believe the state of Florida and the Department of Agriculture recommends that once you hit the $1 million mark, you should have audited financials. I believe that's what it says. I can't remember if it's 500,000 or $1 million. So it has to happen at some point anyway. But just keep that in mind. If you are in doubt, submit way early. That is really, really important. Submit way, way early. It's far better to do that and have it sitting there waiting for the next funding cycle. Again, I mentioned that that online system can get overloaded. You could have some kind of issue. If you see that the grant is due in a week, oh, you just found one on Foundation Director, it's due in a week. I don't know that that's a good idea to pursue. Do you know the stress you put yourself under and the craziness to try and get that grant? Are you going to do a really, really good job? Is it worth it? Is that the only thing you're working on? Because if it is, maybe. But it typically isn't. We're all trying to do lots of different things. So be very sensible. Make sure you submit very, very early. Think about things like, do you have the recommended number of board members and officers? The minimum should be 3. You should have a president, treasurer, and secretary. You should have minutes for all of your meetings. The best practice recommendation is quarterly board meetings. You should have resolutions about the re-election of your board members and your officers every year or whatever the terms are. So think about having some of these things also in place. Do you have your 100% board giving? Are you known in the community? Are you making an effort to get the word out? Are you involved and active? Are you signed up with different associations and chambers and talking about the organization? Do you have a great social media presence where you can refer people to? Will they find you easily? What if they just decide to sit down and Google you? What if a foundation just says, oh, let me just see what their website like and see what they've been up to and see what they've been doing. So make sure that you are really making an effort to build up your visibility. So let's talk about the pitfalls. So some of the major pitfalls. Well, what does it mean to apply to the wrong funder? If you're looking for a grant in the amount of $10,000 for a young or a fairly small nonprofit or just getting started in this process, would it make sense to apply to the Gates Foundation? No, they're probably not going to fund you. So when I say the wrong funder, it's also use some common sense. You know, board members, and I love board members, and I like to empower board members, and I love to see very active and involved ones, but it's so easy for them to just throw out, oh, well, you should apply to this one, and you should apply to that one, and look at all the money that's coming in from Wells Fargo to this organization. Yeah, it's great. They're doing a great job. We're just not there yet. We're not there yet. I've done the research, you know, or here are the trustees at Wells Fargo. Do you know any of them? Because otherwise I don't know that we're even going to have a chance. So applying to the wrong funder can have lots of different ramifications. And don't forget that funders are looking at hundreds, if not thousands of applications. So what is going to make you stand out? The bigger the foundation, the more applications they're getting. So how are you going to really stand out? What is going to make the difference? And is there a way that you can see if you in some way can build that relationship? Is there any commonality? If you were to send that email, Eduardo, for example, before you make the phone call, and you see that the program officer, because you look them up on LinkedIn or because you did a little research and you see that they happen to, oh, you're from Panama and they're from Panama, or they just came back from a trip, or you saw them on Facebook, or, you know, anything that or they have experience having worked for a particular bank and you were associated with that bank, or you just look for threads of commonality as well, because remember, these are human beings. And if we can find a way to connect in an authentic way, we may have a better chance. You know, they don't like the separation any more than we do. So because they do get bombarded. And so they have to, you know, sometimes like put up some restraining barriers here. But I think if we look at this more like, how can we build relationships? How can we have some good conversations, being respectful of their time, being respectful of what we ask, I think we'll have some success. And then don't forget that if you look at foundations, look at the amounts that they are funding other nonprofits similar to yours. So if all of the gifts that they've been giving are 50 to 75,000, but you're just coming out of the gate and you're looking for 10 or 20, is that really a good fit? I don't know. It could be, or maybe not. Maybe you're just a little too junior for them. And don't be discouraged by some that maybe want to fund you for a year or two, but they make it very clear that after that, they will not fund you. There's one that I know in South Florida, the Hagen Foundation. They like to help starting organizations, but they will offload you after about 2 to 3 years. Not offload, off-ramp you, maybe. That's probably a nicer way to say it. But they'll look for a way to encourage you to go find other funding, but they're willing to take the risk early on. So just keep that in mind and don't let that discourage you. Let's see. I said about don't submit a proposal that's missing information. And if there's something really critical that you don't have for whatever reason, ask them. Try and find out if there's a way that you can work around their request. If the instructions say to mail or drop off a physical copy of the proposal, that is what you do. You do not email it. You do not fax it. If they say bring it in, and I say this because there's a very prominent funder in South Florida that still has this. They still want paper applications mailed in or delivered. You find a way to get that to them. You do not mail it, email it, and you do not fax it. So you have to follow the instructions to the T. Okay, we talked about rereading and reading your information. Let's see, incomplete instructions, proofread. I think we talked about all of these. Oh, except we didn't talk about the grant report. Oh, we did briefly. Yeah, grant reports are very, very important. So the moment that you are awarded a grant, you must, I add that to the same spreadsheet. I put the date of the grant report. I work my way back and I say, okay, it's due September 15th. Let me make sure that by August 15th, I've started gathering all my information. By August 30th, I have my draft ready. The first week of September, it's review, and boom, I send it in, you know, by the 7th of September. So they have it well in advance. Let's see. Let me think of anything else.
Kirsten, I have a question.
Yes. Mhm.
So it sounds to me, you know, I'm familiar with government contract RFPs, and there always tends to be this piece that is a constant, right? Do you find that to be the case here? Because as I go through these document lists and what have you, I would imagine many of these are, like someone said earlier, copy paste, right? And then you
Yes.
have the nuances of that specific. Do you find that to be the case? Yes, there's this core that's constant, and then there's a piece that changes.
Yes,
In
I
terms of
do.
the grants.
There tends to be a core that you
Always submit.
always that, yeah, and you may need to just tweak it a little bit. Like they might say the board bios, but they don't need the community involvement.
Right.
They may just need the name and how long they've been on the board, but the core of it, pretty consistent. So I think if you just kind of go for the general things, and you know you've got access to those, then you can quickly pull together what else is necessary. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, yeah, Denise, you're right. I'm hearing that from funders about they can't provide follow-up to denials. Yep, I hear that a lot as well. The Hagen Foundation in Palm Beach County, Nella, is the one that gives grants to organizations that are in early stage growth, and they'd like to help them launch. Now, if you are in Palm Beach County, the Great Charity Challenge is a great option for you. Impact 100, always look for the Impact 100s in your area and apply for those. They are absolutely fantastic. Impact 100 is all over the country. I was a grant reviewer for Impact 100 for 2 years. I also did their strategic planning. This was for Palm Beach County. And it's rigorous. It's rigorous, but again, it's women that are going out and they're seeing for themselves what's happening in their community. It's admirable what they're doing. And the great thing is it's a vote. It's a vote on 5 organizations or 6 or 4, or however much they've raised that year. So it's not even a question of some high and mighty, all-powerful person making that final decision on whether you get the funding. It's actually a group of women, 500 women in an auditorium voting on that night when you give your presentation. So you all have a chance at something like that. So look for those opportunities. 100 Women Who Care, those are all over the place as well. So think about other opportunities as well that are not just foundation directory. Look for some of these other potential funding opportunities that, again, is going to build your arsenal, build your portfolio of potential funding. All right, so let's talk about some of the comments that come back from funders. Again, because now I was also on the board, I was a trustee on the board of a medical foundation in North Carolina for about 3 years. And so I had the opportunity to be on the funding side, as well as I've had the opportunity to be on the nonprofit side. So some of the comments from funders, they decline more grants than they fund. That is just the reality. They like to hear from you, but they want to make sure that you're well prepared. They do not want you to call the week before, because they are just as swamped as you are. So the sooner you call before the deadline, the better. They are also fielding other calls. They have other requirements. They have directors, they have supervisors, they have managers and CEOs that they are responsible to as well. They need to keep them up to date on the progress. So it really puts undue pressure on them if you are calling the week before the due date, if you're calling the day of the due date, if you're struggling with the online format and it's the day of, it's not helpful to them if you are doing this at the very last minute. Accept the answer you're given and follow the recommendations. Otherwise, don't apply. So if they give you a recommendation, you should follow it, or just make the decision, you know what, we're just not ready this year. We're not going to do it. That's fine. You can do that too. Program officers will often look at budgets before they look at anything else. Isn't that crazy? They'll sometimes flip straight to the budget and just see, does it make sense? Do you know what you're talking about? Do the numbers match? Did you build in 80% overhead into this program budget? Little tip on that, by the way, in case you're all worried about, well, okay, we're going to get all this program funding if we apply for programs, but how do we fund our overhead? How do we fund our executive director or our development director? Or so what when we were talking about these multiple program buckets and each program almost being like its own little entity, if this executive director is devoting 20% of their time to the administration and the running of that program, or your bookkeeper or your administrative director is devoting 20% of their time, I build that into the budget. Because if I were to take that program and launch it as an independent organization, I would need someone to do that for part-time. I would need someone to oversee it part-time. It needs money. So if there's a salary of $50,000 and they're devoting 20% of the time, I put $10,000 in there for oversight. And you can call it program administration, program support, program oversight. I would not call it overhead. I would not. This is only for grants that are very program specific, and they say we do not fund overhead or administrative costs or general operating support. So this is program, but you want to allocate a portion of people's time to this particular program, and that will help you cover the expenses that are the overhead and administrative, and it's legitimate. This is 100% legitimate. If I'm the executive director of a small organization and I'm devoting 20% of my time to running this program and overseeing and working with the program staff, then obviously there's a cost to that. What if I weren't there? Somebody would have to step in and do it. So think about these individual programs and how they would fund themselves. But yes, very interesting that they'll look at that budget often before they look at anything else. You want to clearly, very, very clearly explain what the issue is, how you're going to address it, and what are the expected results. Boom, boom, boom. What's the need? Here's the solution. And what are the results going to be? So somewhere in your proposal, you need to address that. Now, one of the little tricks that I have used in the past, and it has worked, is with those character limits, sometimes you really are forced to just like condense it so much. Well, then I'll use another section maybe that I didn't have quite as much information for, and I'll sort of weave in the part that I wasn't able to complete on the other section. So you can get a little creative as long as it flows well and it makes sense. That's something that you can do. And then make sure, like we said before, if you're going to send articles, if you're going to send additional supporting information, make sure that you're not overwhelming them. We're not going to send them 30 press releases or articles from the newspaper or photos or testimonials. Send them 2 or 3. If you have a chance to submit something, though, do it. Don't miss out on that opportunity. Send them something. Really important. And then keep them informed after the grant is funded, like I said before, even if it's not the report, even if it's not the 6-month, 12-month, make sure you're sending them things, you're communicating with them, you're staying in touch with them. And back to Vicki's point about hiring a grant writer. So rules that we need to sort of follow. Don't pay a percentage-based fee or a commission. If you look at the AFP best practices, you do not, development people, development staff, development consultants should not be paid based on a percentage. This is not a sales job. This is meant to be philanthropy. I can't say I always agree with it. I think incentivizing people is not a bad thing. However, I adhere to their norms, and that means not percentage based. Now, can you pay a bonus? So you can pay a bonus. Can you set a rate that you feel is appropriate because of the magnitude of this grant and the possibility that it's going to come through? Yes, absolutely. But stay away from commission percentage, that language. You don't want to use that. I would ask for samples of past grants that they've written. I would ask for their success rate, just hardcore. And I would ask for referrals. I would like to speak with 2 or 3 clients that you have worked with. And I'd like to, I'd like your permission and the names. And so they should not hesitate for a second about giving you that. a lot of grant writers will say, I'm not going to write just one grant because by the time I learn all about your organization, I do all this work and this research, it's just not worth it for me. I'm not going to make enough money on this. I start to make money when I've written you 5 grants because the second, third, fourth, and fifth becomes so much easier because I already have this historical knowledge or institutional knowledge. Try and get them to start with a trial of 1 grant. Just see if they're willing to do it. I know it's hard, but you know, Vicki, you're a perfect case where you could say, I have been burned and I'm not willing to engage you for 3. We'll start with 1. We'll start with 1 and you're going to submit a draft and this is what I'll pay you if it meets our standard. And, you know, if we can submit, this is what, I mean, I don't know. We have to get creative and figure out a way around this because you're kind of held hostage. And, you know, in your case, Vicki, it was 3 grants, 3 deadlines, 3 repair jobs that you had to do. And if you weren't able to fully repair, now you have to wait for the next grant cycle. I mean, that could potentially be lost revenue of over $60,000, $100,000, $50,000. That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, we did our due diligence. You know, I spoke to several others. I did everything that I knew to do. Sometimes,
well, sometimes
things
it
happen, right?
That's right. Sometimes it happens. I mean, it really, yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking, but yes, sometimes it happens. So, okay, so let's, what about any further questions and comments? Concerns? I promised Eduardo that I would send the grant. You know what, also, I'll send you our template for the spreadsheet for the research. Or we'll make it available to you. I'll probably, we'll have to see. Well, we have everyone's email, right? Angie from the registration. So I'll send you the template. We'll send you the sample LOI and grant, probably the link to the YouTube recording. Is there anything else that could be helpful that resource wise that we could, oh, you know what else I have? I have how to make that phone call to a grant officer. Okay, so phone call, like what should you say? How you even start the conversation, and what if they say this and what if they say that? I have a template for that. What else? Can anyone think of anything else that would be a concern or that we should address?
Kirsten, the foundation directory, how often is it updated? When you look at a person's name, their contact information, is it?
Brilliant question. Thank you for asking that, Eduardo. So I forgot to mention this. Okay, so I always use a backup, first of all, and Grant Station, Grant Watch, and Instrumental have more current information, and they have freshly released funds. Let's say my foundation, for whatever reason, decides to change course, and now we're going to fund more technology with students in after-school programs. And now we have an extra $1 million that we want to give away before the end of the year. That is not going to show up in Foundation Directory. Foundation Directory is like the big mothership, and it takes a really long time to turn it one way or turn it right. It's like a shipping ship. Can't remember what they're called right now, but it's very clunky, very, very clunky. The information is 2 to 3 years old. Grant Watch, Grant Station, Instrumental tend to be much more current. They have recent alerts. I love Grant Watch because you can buy 1 month. You can do 1 month and just say, like, this month I'm going to devote, it's a quiet month for me. I'm going to devote my time to all my research. Grant Station, I really, really like, especially that TechSoup 179. The other thing with these is that you can get alerts. It's great. You sign up and you get these notifications. Instrumental does that too. Instrumental's a little more involved. You really have to spend some time and build out your profile, but it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. But Grant Watch and Grant Station, I have been using those for years and years and years, and it's my backup. And I'll double check information and just kind of make sure that that it's accurate. We have a question about, oh, thank you, Vicki. We have a question about normal fee to pay a grant writer. Grant writers hourly are charging between $75 and $200 an hour, roughly. I like arrangements where you can get them to write you 3 or 4 grants a month for, $2,500 or $3,000, or like a set fee. So you know in your mind what to expect. And many will do that because they like the guaranteed income. I mean, hourly is just never, it's never good for anybody. You don't know how long this is going to run. You don't long, it's just, it can be stressful for everyone involved. So I'm careful about that. But boy, those rates they're all over the place. They're all over the place. And it's hard to know if you've nailed it. You just kind of have to take a chance sometimes, maybe compare a couple of different proposals from people. While you think of any other questions, I want to just let you know that we have a board readiness program where Kannico is facilitating and providing all of the back-end support to Calabria and Lynn University. It's a one-day workshop to prepare aspiring board members, people who think they are not ready to serve on a board, people who are on a board, they're not very good, or they feel like they don't have a good understanding. It's completely free. It's at Lynn University on September 21st from 9 to 6:30. 9 to 5 is the training. 5 to 6:30 is a speed match making session where we have nonprofits come in. They meet, and any of you who have nonprofits and would like to be part of that could be part of that as well. And they meet these board members who've just been trained on legal and compliance and financial statements and budgets and best practices and how to be a good board member. And we hope to make a match. And when we did this last year at Lynn University, it was very, very successful. We had, probably 75% match. It didn't happen on that night, but they met and then they followed up, and then we had people join boards. It was wonderful. And these are board members that have learned all of these things. So they know what board service is all about. So let me know, email us at info@Kannico if you are interested for yourself even. I mean, I had some executive directors come last time. The idea is we're looking to encourage people who think that they shouldn't be on a board. Oh, I don't know financials. Oh, I'm a young female. I just graduated from college. Should I be on a board? Yes, we need you on a board. You know why? We need everybody on boards, because what do boards represent? The community that we serve, not just a specific sector, not just the bankers and the lawyers and the insurance brokers. We need everyone to be on boards. And it's part of our volunteer work and our community service. So to sort of eliminate the barriers, we have this great program. We did it last year, very successful. We'd love to invite anyone. I had executive directors who were like, well, I need to know what my board members are supposed to be doing. So I'm coming. So just FYI. And our next session for the Nonprofit Success Series is the end of year giving. So everything from Giving Tuesday and how to ramp up your solicitations towards the end of the year. I'm going to give you sample letters that you can send out for your appeals. That's Friday, October 11th from 9 to 11. So same time like we did today. And thanks to the Miramar Chamber and the Broward Foundation. And then also, of course, a lot of you know already, we do our Kannico free live Zoom trainings. Those are always on the second Tuesday of every month. The next one is September 10th. We are talking about boards because September is going to be all about the board. And we're going to talk about how to empower your board, how to get them engaged and excited and help you get them involved in fundraising and raising awareness. And so that also you can always sign up through Kannico/registration page. And then the last thing is we will always have resources, recorded webinars, everything for free on our website, kannico.com/courses. You can just sign up for free. And that's where we're hoping to put this one as well as it will be on YouTube. So,
Yes.
and I'll make sure that these slides are available as well.
Wonderful. Kirsten, thank you so much. We will be adding this recording to the Chamber's YouTube page. We will send it out to everybody who is registered today. So you guys have that link. Give me a few days, at least until latest on Monday. We'll send you all that information, and Kirsten will get us all of her supplemental information as well. So thank you everybody who is on this call. I'm going to stop the recording for purposes of that, but if anyone has any other questions, please let us know.
Oh, thank you for your comments, Dustin and Lisa and Ursula. Thank you so much.